There is no doubt that the 20th century, above every other, has spawned some of the greatest small arms designs ever known. And today we're going to cover 7 of those best guns from that time period. Now, 2 of these cutting it a little close to the 20th century, but I think they've done so much in the subsequent years that I had to include them on this list. There may be 1 or 2 notable absences from this list, but that doesn't mean that I can't include them in future iterations of these types of videos if this is something that you're into. And so no matter if you agree or disagree, let me know what you think the best guns from the 20th century are. And of course, if you like what I do, consider subscribing. Let's go and get into it. Now, I would say arguably I'll start with the most influential gun on the list, but really, can we argue this? This is the 1911. And so this, of course, was spawned from the genius mind of John Browning. And it really started in the early 1890s when we were adopting a whole bunch of guns and, we needed to get away from revolvers. We knew that. And the early 20th century would prove that we needed something not only with great stopping power, but something that was semi-auto as well. And we found this out quickly during the Philippine-American War. We were using the Colt 1892 that shot the .38 long Colt, and it just, did not do a very good job in that environment. So in 1906, we actually held another set of trials. Now, prior to this, we had actually purchased 1,000 Lugers. They were chambered in 7.65, and we found that the stopping power on those wasn't sufficient. So again, 1906, we bring in a variety of different companies, including the Luger, but we had to make sure that it was at least a 45 caliber. Now, those 2 Lugers were in 45 caliber, and one of which still exists as far as I know. So if you happen to be heir, or that's a family heirloom, and you happen to be the lucky recipient of something like that, you, my friend, have hit the jackpot, essentially. Anyways, it came down to 2 companies, essentially. We had the Colt, we had Savage, we had DWM. DWM started to kind of back away. They thought they were kind of the whipping boy for the other 2 pistol manufacturers, and we weren't going to choose the Luger either way. So DWM pulled out, and during the testing for the 1911 and the Savage, the 1911 fired 6,000 rounds, no problem. The Savage had 37 stoppages. We ended up choosing the 1911. And then, of course, during World War II, these pistols were instrumental. 1.9 million of them were created during that time period by a number of different manufacturers too, from Remington to Colt, and even 500 of them made by Singer, who was best known for making sewing machines. Pistol was used during Korea and Vietnam, and then eventually, after a little bit of debate, it was actually formally adopted by the U.S. Army in 1985. But the action of the gun, the features, all of that really spawned, like I said, pretty much all modern pistols have lineage that go back to the 1911. Of course, in the early 90s, there was people that started creating custom 1911s. And then, of course, we have the 2011 craze, which kind of brings the 1911 into the 21st century. So instead of single stack mags, you got double stacks. Instead of just being able to change the panels, you can change the entire grip module. Of course, having the ability to add a light or a laser with rails. A lot of production companies are doing that as well, where they'll have, the ability to put rails on there from Springfield to, 6 Hour, Smith & Wesson. Pretty much all manufacturers have models that will give you more updated features, even if you decide to go with the standard 1911. And when I can get out in a couple more weeks and start shooting again, I will definitely be taking this one out so we can actually look at it and more of the lineage and what goes into this firearm. But all modern pistols today can pretty much thank John Browning and the 1911, especially the action that it uses. Now here's one of those controversial guns that I've talked about in the past, but definitely an influencer, right? It's one of those guns where, you can look at pretty much every striker fire polymer frame gun and thank pretty much one company for bringing you all of those, and that, of course, is the Glock. Now, these guys were not the first people to bring a striker-fired polymer frame gun to the market. That credit goes to HK with the VP70. But these were the first guys to do it in a big way. Now, almost instantly when this gun came out in the 80s, there was controversy about it. Basically, you'd see news reports on, oh my gosh, there's this new plastic gun and people are going to be able to get it through airport security and there's going to be all kinds of issues. Well, Glock used this to their advantage. They were like, hey, well, we can actually use some of this free marketing and free, hype and, basically scare tactics to our advantage. Now, I did a whole video talking about Glock and the heritage and, how they kind of did all this stuff. So if you want to check that out as well, that's a pretty cool video. But the biggest thing with Glock that you'll notice is this is a time where, of course, the 1911 is pretty much king. We had just adopted the Beretta M9 in 1985. Even revolvers still were very popular, especially with police departments. But there was really a problem with, obviously capacity, stopping power, all of these things had to be considered. Also, weight. If you have 6, 7, or maybe even 8 rounds in a gun, but it's 40 ounces unloaded, that's not ideal. So Glock was able to take the things he learned in manufacturing, which he started actually with making curtain rods, right? And he was able to take these kind of high-grade polymers, put that in the lower, where it's not really necessary for the lower part to be steel anyways. Add steel where it's necessary, keep the weight down, and boom, you have Generation 1 Glocks. Now, of course, there's been many generations. We're on Generation 5. I'm sure we are right around the corner from Generation 6 here very soon. There have been changes throughout the lineup. I don't want to pretend like that's untrue. But, of course, when you look at other companies, they've remained largely the same. You look at a Generation 1 or 2 Glock, you compare it to a Generation 5, there are differences, both internal and external. But you could still tell that, hey, both those look like kind of the same gun. They both look like a Glock. In the mid-90s, they ended up revolutionizing concealed carry with the Glock 26. In early 2019, I want to say April or May, they introduced the Glock 43X, which was meant to rival the P365. And they still make guns in Austria, but they also make some guns in the United States. They actually have a really big place in Georgia. So they've come into the market in the United States, and they still hold the majority share of law enforcement and police departments across the country. Now, while I think that they are revolutionary in what they started with polymer frame striker fired guns, I don't think they're the best polymer frame striker fire gun today. I think there are better options. I think their slogan of Glock Perfection is a little misleading, considering that everybody that owns a Glock pretty much changes things, sights, trigger, grip modules, whatever. They add all kinds of stuff to their gun. They may invest double the money of what the initial gun cost into that Glock to then bring it up to perfection. You spend your money how you want. I'm just telling you what it is, and of course just my opinion. But there's no denying what Glock has done for this market, concealed carry, law enforcement, and just honestly a lot of people that conceal carry them every single day and depend on them to protect themselves. And dude, I don't care what you carry, as long as you're carrying and protecting yourself and your family, I think that's awesome. And these guys have produced over 20 million of these guns as of 2020, so they're not too shabby. So here is one that is absolutely undeniable in the influence that it's had all across the world, many nations, many police departments. A lot of people have used this gun. Now, interestingly, the story kind of starts, like a lot of this, after World War II. Josef and František Kauči were two brothers that were actually at the heart of all of CZ's designs. Now in 1948, Czechoslovakia actually came under communist control, so this affected who the country could then export to. And then after František retired in 1969, CZ came to him one last time. They said, hey, we want you to make a 9mm pistol. You have complete control over this thing. We just want it to be a 9x19. Now, at the time, 7.62 by 25 Tokarev round and 9x18 Makarov were the standardized pistol rounds. So this new gun was basically for export only. But they were actually prohibited from filing patent protection in other countries. So essentially, right off the rip, after the design comes out, it gets ripped off. And today, you see that it is one of the most cloned guns on the market. From the IWI Jericho 941 to TriStar to even Sphinx, these guns are copied by a lot of countries even to this day. But you may say, well, why is it so heavily copied? Well, it uses a tilting locked breech, and kind of what it does is instead of having a link like a 1911, it actually has recesses that are in the top of the slide and then matching lugs on the barrel. So after this moves back just a little bit, the barrel is stopped, and then of course the slide continues its action. So very reliable action there, of course, based off of John Browning. Go figure. Then we have a couple of different things. So this was considered to be pretty revolutionary for the time, because now this one is actually not like that. This one does not have a decocker on it, but essentially what you could do, and what you can do with a lot of these, is you could load around, then you could drop the hammer, and then you could carry it like that, or you could drop the hammer, keep it in single action with the safety on, cocked and locked. So it was a pretty revolutionary design. Now this is considered to be one of the Wonder 9 pistols. I think I'm going to do a separate video on that because I think that would be really interesting and a good one. But essentially what we can do is we can charge the gun up, we can manually drop the hammer, then we can carry with the safety on. Or we could not carry with the safety on and just understand that first shot is going to be a long double action pull. I've already made sure it's clear. And then subsequent shots are going to be a nice single action. So it's kind of a safety on top of a safety, right? Plus we have good capacity in the magazines, double stacked magazines at that. So there's a reason that this is the most copied gun in the world. And again, you have guns like this SARS Lamaz 2000 all the way up to guns like the CZ Shadow 2, which is still one of my absolute favorite guns to take to the range. Now, another design element that I definitely don't want to leave out is the fact that the rails are actually on the inside. So most pistols are going to, ride on top of the rails, whereas this one, it's going to slide on the inside of the rails. And you'll notice how small the slide is in relation to, other popular pistols. It's very small, right? It's very low, and that keeps the bore axis low. So even though we have this extended beaver tail, we still have a gun that is relatively low in relation to our hand. So it keeps that bore axis nice and low and keeps it very flat shooting. They of course have optics versions of these guns, which is what I would opt for now. And there's so many different variants of this gun. Sometimes it can be hard to choose, but this is one that I definitely recommend over a lot of double to single action firearms. It is amongst one of the best even to this day. It definitely wasn't the first Wonder 9 out there, but definitely amongst one of the best. So Mikhail Kalashnikov was a tank commander, and he got injured pretty badly in 1941, and he overheard, his other injured comrades saying how much their rifles sucked and all this kind of stuff. Now they're armed with Mosins and, even the, PPSHs and stuff like that, but, they needed something else, right? Now eventually they would get the SVT-40 as well, which is a fine gun, but, your Mosin and your SVT of course, are using 7.62 by 54R full power cartridges, while the Germans come up with, 7.92 by 33, and they just feel like they are outgunned, and for a long time they were. So Kalashnikov actually threw his name in the hat initially with his Garand-like semi-auto gun, right? The SKS won that contract, but then of course a couple of years after the war ended, the AK would be thrown into service. Now initially they had some issues because of the way some of the internal parts would fit together. It was hard to weld around them. Stamped steel receivers, or sheet metal receivers essentially. So that's when they changed over to the milled receivers, and then eventually they of course did change back over with the AKM variants, and then we have the AK-74 variants, which is the 5.45 by 39. And what they're thinking is, let's get this gun into as many countries' hands as possible. I mean, just berating countries, approving licensing, and exporting the gun basically everywhere that aligned, of course, with their values. What you'll find with a lot of these guns, especially the 7.62 by 39 versions, is that they're not the most accurate guns out there. You're not going to achieve sub MOA, not even close, but as far as for a battle accuracy or self-defense accuracy, they're good enough. And that's kind of the Soviet way. If it's good enough, if it's cheap enough to make, you can replace them. Why repair them? And if it's good enough, you can just keep making them, right? They do the same thing with people, or they have historically in any kind of conflict. They have so many people that they can just kind of, well, okay, we lost, 30 million people during the war, a lot of civilians, obviously, but hey, just keep chunking them out there. Endless resources is what it seems. But they also had, of course, the AKM, which we talked about, and the AK-74 5.45 by 39, which is a much more accurate round. It's closer, though, to your 5.56. But the 7.62 by 39 really was a game changer. The British started looking at the 280 British. Of course, the U.S. kind of strong-armed all NATO countries to go to 7.62 by 51. I've talked about that several times in the FAL video, the M16 video, and the M14 video if you want to check those out too. The AKs, the Russians, Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact countries had a different way of thinking. The intermediate cartridge, they latched onto that first, and having so many of the STG 44s that they captured, well, it kind of makes sense. They saw the true advantages, and God knows what would have happened if Hitler would actually approve that gun way earlier than what he did. So fortunately, none of that panned out. Chrome lined barrels, loose tolerances, so while your accuracy may not be as good as some other rifles, you have one that can run in pretty much any condition, unlubed, don't really care, hand it out, boom, there you go. And there's so many different variants, of course. I've talked about the CZ Bren 2 MS, which is 7.62 by 39. The SIG MCX Spear LT, 7.62 by 39. I did an entire video talking about the best AK variants or best AK alternatives. And, one thing you'll notice with all of them, they have the curved magazine. That's something they have to do for reliable feeding. But it's spawned so many different types of guns. It's been licensed out, and it's still one of the most popular guns out there. At one time, I want to say this was early 2000s, they estimated there was 500 million guns in the world, and 100 million of those guns were actually AK variants. There's so much more to talk about. This is literally just the tip of the iceberg. So I think I'm going to do a dedicated video on the AK specifically, very similar to what I did with the M16 video. So be on the lookout for that. Still, one of the most influential guns of all time. And again, it started with the STG 44. And everything the AK was really good at, reliability, being a super tough soldier-proof gun, the AR didn't start like that, but that's not the whole story. Because everybody that tested the M16 prior to it being adopted actually said this thing ran like a freaking champ. Well, it turns out the Ordnance Corps did not want the M16 they wanted the M14 to actually do better. I used one example in that video that I made talking about how the Ordnance Corps did a comparison with the M16. So they had a custom M14 match grade ammo, best everything on the M14 with the and compare that to an out of the box AR. And you know, that's just what they did. They wanted the M16 to fail. They wanted the M14 to just do better. And so during testing, they didn't care what kind of ammo was used during testing, but they refused to send that ammo out with the guns once they eventually got adopted in Vietnam. Now, Colt actually bought the trademarked AR-15 name. They still own it to this day, so that's why you see every other AR on the market is not marketed as an AR-15. It's marketed as an M&P-15 or, you know, something like that, or a St. Victor or a Ruger 5.56 or something like that. Only one company can sell them with the AR-15 name. And Colt took no time in really selling these to the civilian market. They started in 1963. They've been in American civilian hands for that long. And so it's a rifle that is definitely more accurate because of that round. And it's one that takes a little bit more care probably than the AK, but still they're gonna run fantastic. So you either have your gas impingement type systems with the tube, or you may have like piston guns, right? Piston guns are pretty popular in the AR platform. You have heavy barrel versions, you have pencil barreled versions. You have versions with full length handguards all the way up. You have some with free floating, you know, 15-inch handguards or 12-inch, you know, there's pistols and everything else. Just talking about the rifle though, of course, what the rifle spawned really. We used to have guns with quad rails all around them. Now we have a cleaner look with M-LOK, so you can, you know, free up space right there. And all of the controls are a little bit more intuitive for sure compared to a traditional AK where you have to kind of rack it on this side. Now you have a charging handle back here. You have a bolt release on the left-hand side, and of course, magazine release on the right-hand side. Of course, they went away from the fixed position stock, right, to the collapsible stock. You can even actually fold these stocks now. Even if you have the buffer spring in the stock itself, there's adapters and stuff you can put on there if you wish to do that, right? Traditional pistol grip, forward assist, dust cover, all of that kind of stuff is pretty much standard on your AR, and it's spawned the M4 and so many different variants. This rifle is very influential. If there was like a second most influential gun of all time, it has to be, the AR has to be in the conversation at least. Maybe not the second most influential, but it's definitely up there for sure, top 5. Super easy to clean, 2-piece upper lower receiver, right? So very easy to field strip, and of course, you know, keep the rifle clean. Plenty of conversions, plenty of different caliber choices in the AR platform. And everything from 22 on up to 308, 6.5 Creedmoor, and anything else you can think of, you can pretty much find the AR is going to be chambered in that. Now, there's things about the AR I'm not a huge fan of, like the charging handle. I prefer guns like the CZ Bren 2, charge on the left-hand side. Things like that are just personal preferences, but you can get these in a bunch of different configurations. The AR is like the building block for a defensive rifle because you can change anything on this gun that you don't like. It can be changed. I keep my guns pretty simple. I don't really change a whole lot of stuff, but regardless, that's something, if you feel like you need to do that, you can absolutely do it. And it has spawned, and I mean, industries and companies have been spawned just from this rifle alone. And while it wasn't, you know, forced out into the world as much as the AK, and hence it hasn't been adopted as much, it still has merit with a lot of people that have actually used it in those wartime situations. So pretty interesting, man. It is America's rifle, and it will always be that. There's so many of them in the country, so many different types of variants, so many companies that make them. Again, you know, it's one of those videos where I should probably go through and do like a modern AR video and maybe talk about, you know, the 7 things you need to look for when buying an AR. There's a lot that goes into this. I believe in spending a little bit more money, at least getting like a mid-grade from a good, reputable company, right? That's typically the way I like to go. But again, it is one that can be had $500-600 all the way up to $2,000-2,500 and more sometimes, depending upon what you put into the gun. Definitely one of the most influential guns of all time. Now, what Glock did for the polymer frame striker fired market, I believe Smith & Wesson did for the concealed carry market. Now, some of you may disagree with that completely, which is fine. Just let me tell you my opinion on this. Now, before the original Shield came out in 2012, you had guns like the original PPS, even the XDS, which came out in 45, but eventually they would come out with that gun in a 9mm as well. And while those are fine options, there was something special about the original Shield because it offered pretty much all of the benefits of the full-size M&P in a much slimmer and easier to conceal package. So really an interesting firearm when you look at it from that perspective. It's also interesting because the M&P was not really a gun that people considered as a good option. I mean, even to this day, people that just don't keep up with this stuff, I'll tell them what I carry, and they'll be like, "Really? That's why would you carry that? Why would you carry a Glock or any, you know, they'll name any other gun out there pretty much." They have no idea how good this lineup has become, and it all goes back to that original Shield. I mean, you're talking about Smith & Wesson, who was sued by Glock, and Glock won that lawsuit because of the Sigma series. You know, they had to pay them, I think it was $9 per pistol that was sold, and then here they come around with the M&P lineup, which of course is different, and that wasn't the first time that they had used that M&P designation, by the way. First time they used M&P designation was in 1899 on their Model 10, which was chambered in .38 long Colt. So the M&P designation has been around for a long time. But again, up until the time they came out with the Shield, they had really gritty, nasty triggers. I mean, there was no redeeming quality, no good redeeming quality about their triggers whatsoever. And that's one of the struggles with striker fire guns, you know, especially back then, you know, predating your PPQs and your VP9s and your new Shields or your new M&P lineup, your SIGs, all of that. Trying to replicate like a single action trigger out of a DASA or, you know, even like a really nice revolver is kind of tough to do. But one thing like Glock really showed is that you can have a good snappy audible reset, and that's going to, you know, help the shooter if you tend to shoot off the reset and all that kind of stuff. It was just better all the way around than what the original M&Ps were. And then they changed the game up with the Shield. Now, it was still the hinge design, but they just made it lighter, crisper, and it had an audible reset. Mine, I still have mine, by the way. They've since discontinued the gun, but mine had like a false reset. So you'd hear kind of like a reset before the actual reset.
Really gets me. Listen to this. Right? Not the reset. I've talked about this before. So it has that false reset. I feel like I hit it. I go to pull the trigger and nothing happens. So that's not the reset. That's the reset.
But either way, before then, Apex and M&P were kind of synonymous together. If you bought an M&P, you probably needed an Apex to go with it. Regardless, here we are. And these guys have built upon that lineup with the M2.0 and then the Shield Plus. And believe it or not, the Shield Plus came out in spring of 2021. I think it was April or May 2021. It's been out for over 3 years now at this point of doing the video, which is pretty freaking insane. At the end of 2019, obviously before the Shield Plus, they had reported that they had shipped out 3 million shields already up to that point. So for a company that nobody really considered having a good, solid polymer frame striker fire gun up until that original Shield, they really started to kind of find their way and fine-tune the gun to a big extent. And of course the Shield ended up in a lot of holsters. It's ended up in my waistband, and ever since, really, this has been the gun that I've carried more than any other, especially this new variant, the Shield Plus. It is just a fantastic gun and has been for a really long time, which is why it's shown up in probably, I don't know if I had to put a number on it, I don't know, maybe 50 videos now at this point, maybe more, maybe a little less, I don't know, a bunch of videos. I've talked about the Shield Plus quite a bit, and I will continue to until they come out with a new Shield, and then I'm sure I'll be talking about that one as well. It really revolutionized what we think of as a concealed carry gun, and continues to do that with increased capacity, better features, optics ready, and all that stuff. And the last most influential gun we'll talk about in this video specifically is the M9130, also known as the Mosin Nagant. But when they had the trials in the late 1800s, they actually had 3 separate guys submit this 3-line rifle. Now, I'm not even going to try to say their names because I'm sure to screw them up, but there was a guy named Mosin, there was a guy named Nagant. Nagant lost the contract. They said that his rifle was too complicated. You need tools to break it down and all of that kind of stuff. So they were worried about Mosin's rifle too, about the quality of it, but they ended up choosing that one. Well, Nagant filed a lawsuit and actually ended up winning based on patent infringement is what he initially sued on. So a lot of people call it the Mosin Nagant. It's actually known in Russia more so as the Mosin's rifle or 3-line rifle, not really the Mosin Nagant. So an interesting story from World War I about this rifle is the Russian government couldn't keep up with production. So they contracted with Remington and New Westinghouse in order to get, you know, some, I think 1.5 million from one, maybe 2 million rifles from another, or maybe 1.8 from New Westinghouse. Well, anyways, we ended up making, or Remington and New Westinghouse ended up making and delivering like over 469,000 rifles. Well, when the Soviets were able to basically, you know, sign the treaty to get out of World War I, Lenin said, yeah, no, stop payment for that. And they left them on the hook. Basically almost put the two companies out of business. We were able to actually sell the remaining 280,000 rifles to the United States Army. And that's basically what kept them afloat. Pretty crazy story. And then, of course, during the interwar periods, there was some design changes to the rifle. There's carbine versions of this gun. There's finished versions of this gun. There's hexagon receivers. There's round receivers. That was done in like the mid to late 30s to simplify the design of the gun. Those hex receiver ones are obviously worth more money. Finish 9130s are worth more money, of course. PU versions, the sniper versions of these guns, came with a fixed 3.5 times optical scope. And during World War II, of course, this rifle made legends out of not only people on the Russian side, many women as well actually, but also one Finnish sniper in particular. Simo Haya, I think is the way you pronounce his name. If I got it wrong, apologies. But he was known as the White Death, and he used one of these rifles, a Finnish version of the 9130. I think they called it a 2830 actually. He used it without a scope because he didn't want the glare, right? And also he said, hey, with the scope, you got to lift your head up so high off the thing that it actually makes you an easier target. Over actually 505 confirmed kills by that one guy. So he used their rifle against the Soviet Union 505 kills, one single sniper. And that's what you'll find with this gun, is how incredibly accurate the round is. And of course, they're still found to this day. I mean, there have been so many countries that have, adopted these things. And of course, after World War II, the AK-47, then the AKM eventually, they really ramped up production on those, of course, and the SKS for a short period of time. But it was primarily the AK. But other countries, that needed a cheap rifle to protect themselves, of course, would use something like this. And again, really known for its accuracy, carbine versions, and all that kind of stuff we've already mentioned. So almost 20 million of these rifles made during World War II. That is absolutely nuts. And 37 million is like the estimate today as far as how many rifles have been produced. It is really a thing of legends. Now, of course, the action is not nearly as smooth as what you'll find on a K98. It has locking lugs similar to the K98. It's a two-piece bolt, by the way. Those locking lugs are horizontal, whereas the K98 actually uses vertical locking lugs, and the K98 has that safety lug in the rear. The magazine follower is actually low enough where it's not going to stop the bolt from going forward either, by the way. So it doesn't really matter if it's on empty or if it's loaded there. One thing I've found with the rifle is that, when you start getting some rounds through it, this bolt will stick pretty bad. So you really got to bang that thing up in order to get it to unstick as you're working it. But all the way around, dude, this rifle, I mean, just an incredible history. This one actually is from 1943. I haven't taken it out of the safe in a while. I haven't shot it in a while. I think it's one of the guns that I am. Once I can get back to the range, I'm going to shoot this one again. So hopefully some of that footage will be in this video. If not, we may do a separate one just on this gun, because again, like some of the others I've covered in this video, it's pretty much just the tip of the iceberg for a lot of these. These are legendary and super influential guns, and some of them turned the tide of war. Some of them literally changed the way we look at small arms after the war. A lot of these tied to just incredible people, incredible times, really bad times, and really bad times have created some of the greatest guns on the planet. There you go, man. I'd love to hear your opinion. What do you think some of the most influential guns are? If you leave those down below, and there's a possibility where I can get those guns, I will absolutely do it. Not only do I love making these videos, but I know that you guys love watching them. If you really like what I do, consider subscribing, hit your notifications, and join the SHOT team. Really cheap to do that, and it helps out a ton. You get some cool benefits too. You can do that here or over on Patreon. Big thanks. See you in the next one, and as always, hold them down.